Mind hitting the record. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our third webinar in this year's installment of the Duchess Land Conservancy's Earth Matters webinar series. As usual, my name is Brian Sternidi, and I'm the Outreach and Preserve Manager with the Duchess Land Conservancy. Tonight, we're super excited to welcome Brian Kelley of the Gathering Growth Foundation. And before we get started with Brian's awesome photography and stories, my role tonight is to go over the basic logistics about this webinar. After that, our Education Director, Julie Hart, will provide a brief introduction to the DLC and tonight's presenter. So first, you'll notice that you are muted and chat is disabled for this event to ensure that there's no interruption during the presentation. Second, the raise hand function is disabled. We welcome questions, but we ask that you answer all questions into the Q&A box at any point during the presentation. You can access the Q&A box at the bottom center of your screen. Questions will be addressed when the presentation is done or by our team during the presentation if possible. If there are a great deal of questions, we will try to combine them based on topics. Also, you can scroll through the questions to see if the question you're thinking about has already been asked. Third, closed captioned is enabled for this event. To turn this function on, please select the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And finally, I'd love to hand it over to Julie Hart, our Education Director, who will tell you a bit about the DLC, this webinar series, and our awesome presenter. Julie?
Thank you, Brian. I'm Julie Hart, an ecologist and educator here at the Duchess Land Conservancy, and I'm delighted to be here tonight with these two Brians and with all of you. So thank you all for joining us. Most of you are probably familiar with the DLC, but for anyone who's not, let me give you a quick overview. The Duchess Land Conservancy is a private nonprofit land conservation organization located in the Hudson Valley of New York State, and we're dedicated to preserving the farms and forests, wetlands and waterways, open spaces, and wildlife habitats of Dutchess County. We are an accredited land trust, and since our founding in 1985, we have worked with hundreds of landowners and protected over 47,000 acres of land. We are grateful to all of these conservation-minded folks, and also grateful to our sponsors, the Molly B. Schaefer Education Fund, Labella Associates, and Mutual of America. And by the way, if you're someone who does math in your head, you will have noted that an organization founded in 1985 must be celebrating their 40th anniversary in 2025. We're really looking forward to making this an extra special year, so stay tuned for upcoming events and celebrations as we recognize this great milestone. So tonight's webinar, we're excited about this whole season of Earth Matters. This is our winter webinar series, and on the first Wednesday of each month through April, we'll be bringing you a fascinating speaker with a lot to teach us. And this season, we're learning about the wonders of trees and forests and the important ecological roles that they play. I hope that these webinars will help you to see the trees and forests around you in a new way, to read the stories that can be found in their branches and buds, to see the connections between the trees and the wildlife they support, and to find a new appreciation for these diverse and resilient communities called forests. So let's get started. We're so glad to welcome Brian Kelley of the Gathering Growth Foundation this evening. Brian has a background in photography and visual arts, and his extensive work in still life photography provides the foundation for his artistic pursuit of building the cultural archive of American ephemera and landscape. He works on a variety of long-term projects in addition to the Gathering Growth Foundation, such as the National Park Service Brochures Archive and the Archive of New York City Transit Artifacts. Since starting the Gathering Growth Foundation in 2017, Brian has been on a mission to visually preserve the legacy of the oldest and largest trees in the US and to slow the constantly shifting baseline on how we perceive trees in our everyday lives. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian. And he is going to introduce us to some of the remarkable trees that he has met.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm going to bring this up. All right. Everybody can see that? Good. My name is Brian Kelley, as Julie said. I'm in Sullivan County, New York, in a small town called Lumberland. and I'm going to share with everybody tonight basically how I got into trees, my background, where I'm from, and what my future goals are with Gathering Growth Foundation. So I grew up in a very small town in upstate New York called Horseheads, New York. It's in the Chemung County, and really not many big trees up there. Went to Horseheads High School, where when I was my freshman year, I accidentally got put into a multimedia class, which was about photography. I showed up with like a pen, piece of paper, and a pencil, thinking I was just going to draw all day. And it was actually just a black and white film photography class. And that was really the start of how I got into photography. I had a teacher that was just incredibly supportive, and nothing you did was wrong. It was more of just like, how can you improve it, or what did you learn from it? And so I can really say that having a teacher that didn't make photography serious, like didn't make it feel like it was something that you could do wrong or do right, it made it fun. So that's why I continue to do that. Eventually, I ended up in New York City, where I went to the School of Visual Arts, where I studied photography for 4 years. And the whole time I was there, my passion was in skateboard photography. That's what I did all throughout high school. It's what I did all throughout college. And upon graduating from college, as anybody with college debt, you're trying to figure out, what can I do for a living, and the whole time all I want to do is skateboard photography, but being a skateboard photographer is not going to pay student loans. And so I started doing still life photography. And I was able to make a living doing still life photography as well as skateboarding, and kind of blending the two. Um, where I was shooting product for skateboard companies, as well as shooting some of the skateboarders doing the tricks they were doing as well. Eventually, working for a studio in Soho, where that's where I really developed a lot of my still life. And so I was able to start shooting for companies like Nike, Adidas, and a couple other major brands. Um, and then that eventually led me to working with a brand called Huff, which they're a San Francisco, LA based brand, where basically was able to travel around the world with them shooting skateboard photography, but also able to um, shoot all of their still life. So all of their product photography that they had to put on their website to make their product look good. But it really allowed me to travel the world and a lot of the US. But eventually I kind of got into a scene where I just felt like it was like Groundhog's Day, where it was the same thing over and over again of going on a skateboard trip, which is great, but I felt like I wanted to do something bigger, something that was like more meaningful with my photography. Some of the stuff that I had done with the brand. Eventually, though, when I was on a skateboard trip, my friend from New York City had given me a copy of this New York Times magazine featuring Robert Frank, who was a American, well, I think Swedish photographer living in America that made the book The Americans, which he spent, I think, nearly 3 years traveling around the U.S. documenting what the U.S. was at that time. And it's probably one of like the most powerful photography books capturing that moment in time. And that was a really big inspiration for me, just to be able to think about like, okay, how can I contribute in some way towards this archival photographic process in the American landscape, or in artifacts. And that's kind of where I started doing like the transit project, um, just trying to figure out how to blend all of those projects together. And so when I came back from one of these trips, the skateboard trip I was on, um, I decided to buy my first used car, as an inspiration from Robert Frank, as a way to get out of New York City and just experience what the United States had. And so one of my friends and I bought a used car off of McGinnis Boulevard in Brooklyn, and we made our way west, eventually hitting Bozeman, Montana, where my car actually ended up breaking down, and I had to make this decision in my life of, do I fly back home or do I try to buy another car and continue the trip? And I really look at that as one of the more pivotal moments in my life of, I feel like that this whole time throughout like 2015, 16, it was like all these decisions I had to make that could have led me down a different path in life. And I always kept going towards the things that were like maybe scarier, of taking on another car loan. And so I ended up buying another car and continuing the trip. That's my friend Kuzma. And we were able to see way, way more. We were able to continue on to the Badlands. We were able to get up into the Pacific Northwest. This is the Badlands at sunrise. This is the new car. This is camping on the California coast. But eventually we made our way up into Olympic National Park. And this was, for me, the first time I had ever seen big trees. And I think this is what was an initial inspiration towards what I do now for a living. And when I say big trees, these are trees that are, you know, stuff like this, seeing driftwood on the beach that, it's a tree that's bigger than anything else we have on the East Coast. And then this is us walking through the Hall of Mosses, which was an incredible experience. And then this was probably like the first, a part of this trip where this is one of the largest east or western red cedars in America. This is called the Duncan cedar. It's got about a 60-foot circumference or 19.4 diameter. This was a tree that was spared in a clear cut in Washington State. And I think when you see a person next to it, which you'll see a little bit later, uh, it's just something that puts, your whole life into a different perspective, and you have nothing but respect for a thing that's probably been alive for 2,000 years old. Um, and that whole trip, just continual for visual inspiration towards the natural world, going from the complete opposite of when I was living in New York City. Eventually making my way down to the coast redwoods. Again, this whole trip just continuing. This was at like such a, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right word, but this was at just like a pivotal moment in my life where I was like, do I just keep doing still life photography, commercial photography, or do I go towards this thing that's like making me happy? Which was a huge risk, but I was able to take that. And after that trip, I did go back to New York City, and the whole time I was there, I was just feeling really overwhelmed, going from spending almost 2 to 3 months on the road, just in like some of the most peaceful areas you can ever imagine. And then you have to go back down to the L train in Brooklyn and deal with this every day. Um, yeah, not fun. But I would seek refuge, in these natural places in New York City, like the New York Botanical Garden, the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And this is again where, I was still this whole time trying to figure out, what can I do? How can I keep photographing trees if I'm on the East Coast? Um, and I didn't even know at this time I took this photo, but the tree that's there on your right, it's called the Hangman's Elm, which is an English elm tree, which is possibly one of the oldest trees in New York City. And it's in Washington Square Park at the northwest corner of it. And I didn't even like the first time I took this photo, I barely was paying attention to it. I don't think I really realized how big it was until I got close to it. And then later photographed it again, and it just felt like, okay, like there's something in New York's City. I think they might have some trees. Let me continue to photograph in and around the city. And the whole time I was in New York, I was just trying to get my hands on every book I could about trees or nature, just trying to educate myself on, how do I ID trees? How do I get to know them better? How do I like walk through the woods and I can just like, I know what I'm looking at. Um, and also just trying to understand the history of especially the East Coast, just because going from the West, coming back to the East, the question I just kept asking myself was, why aren't there any big trees out here? But I just also just didn't know how to look for them yet. This was probably one of the first inspirational photography books that I had seen for trees specific. And this is by Mitch Epstein. It's called New York Arbor. And um, it's basically highlighting some of the oldest and largest trees in New York City. And this was also probably one of the first times I'd seen anybody photograph trees in a more artistic way and not just like from, scientific, here's a close-up of bark, here's your leaf ID, and here's the tree, but it's like a cell phone photo of it. So this was something I could try to relate to, and how do I do something like this? This was another one all about New York City trees. Again, just looking at this book constantly, Mitch and going and visit all those trees. And then this one as well. This is by Rachel Sussman. It's the oldest living things in the world. And this book also was just like an initial inspiration just from photographing trees, photographing living organisms, where her baseline of what she started this project with was the baseline age of 3,000 years old. So anything in this book is older than that, which I just thought was incredible. Um, and then eventually going down the Google rabbit hole of big tree searches, I finally found out about American Forest, which is one of the oldest environmental nonprofits in the U.S. And back in 1940 or 41, I can't remember, they started the National Champion Tree Program, or the Big Tree Program. And this for me was, okay, like here's the archive of all of the oldest and largest trees in the US. I can't wait to see them. And it was just, when I first found out about this, a lot of the photos were just enthusiasts, people that were retired from work, and they would go out and find trees and take a photo of it with their cell phone and submit it. And that was the photo for this tree. And I thought that it should and could be better than that. This is this was one of the first another organization doing a similar thing, but out in BC, in British Columbia. And this is the Ancient Forest Alliance. And one of the founders of it, TJ Watt, he had done a great job of going out and photographing these trees at a very high level. And so that was a big inspiration too early on, and eventually leading me to want to go out to Vancouver Island in BC to go see them as well. And so eventually on an artist residency with some friends, I was able to go see which the tree on your left is called the San Juan spruce. And this is, I believe it's dead now, but at the time it was the largest spruce tree. I can't remember the circumference of it, but as you can see with my friend next to it, it's just an incredible, incredible spruce. And then the base of this tree on your right is it's called the Red Creek fir, which is the largest Douglas fir tree in the US, or in the world, sorry. This is a tree called Big Lonely Doug, which is a Douglas fir that was left standing in this clear cut. And then again, this was like a second time I'd gone out to Vancouver, and this was like really, it's like some of the first times I was photographing big trees. And so still trying to figure out composition, how to show the whole tree. Do you show the whole tree? Do you just go for the base? And so yeah, this was a huge part of like getting going with everything, was this initial trip out to Vancouver Island. And we did this that second time we went out. This was for the creators class, which was a thing that was partnered with Canon in Canada. And so we went out and made a short film about going around Vancouver Island, documenting some of these big old trees. And this was something that was able to, lead to enough promotion to allow me to get some funding and buy a transit van with the goal of going around the country documenting all of the oldest and largest trees, or the champion trees, for American forests. And so with a friend, we spent about 5, 6 months building out my transit van. And the goal was by summer, I think we started this in like early winter, eventually getting it to a point where it was livable. And this was one of my first maps that I had created. Once I was able to start working with American Forest, going around the country to document all the champion trees that they had listed on their register. And so for quite a bit of time, I think almost 2.5 years, I was able to live out of that transit van and just go around the country documenting champion trees. Um, it was definitely an experience that was amazing. And part of my process, going through so every single tree that I was photographing I was photographing digitally as well as on large format film. And the choice to do large format film was more from the archive perspective, as well as it's a whole nother level of quality compared to the digital files. It's definitely an expensive process, but I think well worth it for the final outcome, as well as, again, going back to the archival aspect of it. In addition to photographing, I was doing soundscape recordings. So every time I got to a tree, I would set a microphone up somewhere just to capture the ambient noise. So, 100 years from now or 50 years from now, if this archive still exists in some capacity, somebody has a record of what it sounded like in this very specific moment in time, and maybe there would be a clue to the cars, the people. Sometimes owners of trees would come over and I would have whole conversations recorded, and it was just this cool little snippet where they were telling their backstory about growing up with this tree or how they used to build a tree fort in here. And then also on your right, you see a little photo studio, which was very, very makeshift, but I was photographing leaves, seeds, needles, anything that was, on the ground, or I was able just to pick out real quick from the tree, just to add to not only the confirmation that the ID on the trees that I was photographing was correct, but also just to add again to the archive of the species that I was documenting. Lots of chili every night. That's basically what I ate almost like 50% of the time. This was probably the first tree that I photographed on my champion tree trip when I started this. And this is, at the time, I don't know if it's actually alive anymore. I think it might have fallen, but this is the national champion shingle oak in Ohio. Yeah, I mean, basically my goal too, when I was starting this project, I was always wanting to try to get to these trees by very, very early morning dusk, or towards sunset, or sorry, dawn or dusk. And this is like probably 6 a.m. in July, and you have to wake up very early for sunset or sunrise in the summertime. This is the national champion Fremont Camp Cottonwood. This is in Skull Valley, Arizona. Um, and again, this was at sunset, the choice to try to get more dramatic lighting, but also sometimes photographing it when it was really soft lighting, like the last light of the day. I just feel as though that type of light really complements, and it doesn't allow for crazy shadows to be casted on the tree. So you get to see the whole tree and not crazy dark spots everywhere. This was like, I didn't know that cactuses were going to be part of this, but this was the national champion or national co-champion saguaro cactus. I can't remember the state park that it was in or national forest, but this was in Arizona as well. And then finally getting out towards California on this trip, and this is the largest Pacific ponderosa pine. I believe that it's now gone from the El Dorado fire that happened a few years ago. But yeah, this tree was incredible to see in person. And then this was the photo on your left when I arrived to go photograph the national champion American chestnut in Oregon. This is all that was left of it. And supposedly the arborist had told the owners that the tree was dead most likely because the building you see to your right was a preschool. So every day you had kids running around the tree, and they think that that led to soil compaction, and then the tree died. But as you can see right next to it, there is another tree, which is the shot below of me standing next to another American chestnut, which I nominated as a national champion, but I think there's one up in Washington that's a little bigger. But I think just coming from the East Coast, it was really cool to be able to see an American chestnut that big, historically, that we might have seen all throughout the East Coast. The photo on your left is the national champion yellow cedar. Again, this was, a species that I was not familiar with at all, but an incredible adventure up there to go find. This is in Oregon. And then again, in Oregon, you have a tree that I don't think anybody would think that it's a tree, but this is the largest sagebrush. And this is in Oregon. This is in an area called, I'm totally blanking on it right now. But this is in Christmas Valley. But this is this research area where it's Western junipers and ponderosa pines that are surrounded by a desert. And this is the largest Western juniper in the country. And this is going back to that tree I revisited from my first trip out west. And this is how big it was, just to give everybody a sense of scale. And again, every time I see this photo, it's just crazy to think that a tree can get that big. Something that also isn't a redwood, because everybody just thinks that the redwoods are the biggest things. But spruce, Doug fir, ponderosa pines, western red cedars, historically, we're getting, close to that size as well. Like this. This is the national champion Sitka spruce. This is in Washington as well at Lake Quinault. And this was probably one of the first trees where I kind of got like bummed or like sad about, turning a tree into a tourist destination. Because as you can see, all around the base of the tree for the last 30 years since its discovery, you just have complete soil compaction and people climb all over the base of it. And you can see in that photo, all of it's just starting to die back more and more. And this was almost 5-6 years ago. And since then, I've seen photos of it and it's dying back even further. And again, too, this was something that was sparking this curiosity to try and do something more than just national champions or champion trees, because you have the Quinault spruce, which was a national champion. And then just a little ways from it, you have the Queet spruce, and both Sitka spruces. And this one, from a point perspective of how people nominate a tree through a point system, this does not have the same amount of points. But from a wood volume perspective, this is the larger Sitka spruce. And so this was one of the first times where that discussion was being had of a champion by size, or or by points, or a champion by pure wood volume. And this is kind of when I started having more of the internal discussion of documenting more than just champion trees. This is the national champion big leaf maple, which was a weird one that you could actually fully walk through. This is in Oregon. The tree on your left, just recently, so this is in Yosemite Valley, and this is two big tree hunters that I connected with. This is Carl Casey and I'm trying to remember his last name, but Martin. And they co-discovered, I believe, well, it was originally discovered by Michael Taylor, who's a big tree hunter out west. And this is a sugar pine, and this is now the largest pine tree on Earth. And so when we went and I photographed this, it wasn't confirmed yet, and Carl had found another one. But as of recent, this is it just got released that this is now the largest. They did a volume model on it. Tree on your right is a red California red fir, which was also in Yosemite. That's just incredible. This is the photo on your left is the national champion Monterey cypress, which was a crazy clump of trees. And then again, I think like seeing a tree like this or like that big leaf maple also started having me ask the question of multi-stem versus single stem. Was it, do you want to count a crazy fused stem or do you want to try to keep it to just single stems? Like this ponderosa pine, which is the national champion ponderosa pine. This is California Buckeye, which was a weird one, but this was at Swan Pacific Ranch, which is part of Cal Poly, and I believe it was lost in the Big Basin fire that happened a few years ago. And after that first year, I mean, most of those photos I just showed were in my first year of living on the road and working with American Forest, documenting champion trees. And then I eventually came back east for a little bit. And so I was photographing the trees, and this is the national champion white ash in New Jersey. Just incredible to see a white ash this big still. And it gets through New Jersey. I don't know if it's DC or whatever they have, but it does get annual injections to help fight it from EAB. This is the national champion white oak in Virginia. This thing was incredible. I believe it has a 27 or 28-foot circumference, if I remember correct. Here it is next to the house, which was an amazing, amazing one. And then this was one that, not a lot of people will probably ever see, or this is on private property, but this is the national champion pitch pine, which to see a pitch pine this big, if anybody knows that species, it's pretty incredible. They usually get about half that size or even less, especially if they're forest grown. This was the national champion cucumber magnolia. This is in Ohio. And eventually I spent about 6 months back on the East Coast and eventually started going out west again. And on my way, I was able to make a couple stops. This is the national champion yellow buckeye on your left. And then this is the national champion uh, American basswood on your right. That's in Kentucky. And if anybody knows sassafras, this is the largest sassafras in the United States on your left, which is incredible to see a sassafras that big. This is in Kentucky as well. And then over on your right is the national champion red oak in Ohio. This was probably one of like the harder hikes up to a tree that I'd ever done, but this is the oldest and largest Rocky Mountain juniper. This is right around 1,500 years old, and just an incredible hike. And it was also like one of the first trees I had photographed in the snow. That was also a whole nother challenge in its own when you are trying to set up 4x5 and you have wind blowing the snow everywhere and your film's getting wet. This was a hike up in Utah, or no, sorry, not Utah, Nevada. And this is at the time, I believe it's no longer, but this was the national champion Great Basin bristlecone, which was also just incredible to go and see. Classic sequoia. This is General Sherman. This is national champion giant sequoia. And this was a documentary I was able to make with two of my friends, multiple friends that also helped in that whole process. But this was discovering the world's largest pine tree. And this was a documentary focused on Carl Casey, the big tree hunter that I mentioned earlier. And this was up in Calaveras Big Tree State Park. But yeah, this was an incredible experience just to be able to make a short film about trees with some of your best friends. Still living out of the van. And then this is the national champion Sierra juniper, also called the Bennett juniper. And I think they have it estimated at like over 2,000 years old because there was a there was an animal that was living inside of the tree in the hollow, and it was able to like it dug out some, I think like pieces of the tree, some tissue or whatever, some heartwood, and they carbon dated that. So like that's what I've been told. Uh, when I got done with that whole round, that's when I came back to the East Coast and I decided to start gathering growth foundation. And again, I really wanted to expand past just having it be um, champion trees. I really wanted to figure out a way to document historical trees, old trees, forests, old growth forests, or forests that were unique to a landscape that might be rare, and just kind of have this be this giant, giant archive of some of the oldest and largest trees in the US. Focusing in on the Catskills, this is Hunter West Kill, which, as Dr. Kudish has mentioned, there are significant amounts of pockets of old growth all over the Catskills. And so that also became a huge interest, especially for when I moved up into this area. Some giant yellow birch up in there, as well as hemlock. Going out to Zoar Valley in Western New York, documenting some of the tallest trees in New York, as well as some ridgetop, old, probably 100-year-old or more, chestnut oak, as well as cedars, junipers. Like this guy over here on your left, I mean, who knows how old that thing is, but it's so squiggly and it's just been trying to live on the edge of this cliff for hundreds of years. This is my partner on the book, Eric Danielson. He now works for the Harvard Tree Ring Lab, but this was a discovery he had made. This is, I believe at the time, I think the top got blown out, but this is the largest tulip tree. This was the tallest tulip tree in New York State. I think it had something like 160 or 170, I think, foot tall. Uh, this is Bob Leverett, who has made some of the bigger big tree discoveries or old tree discoveries in Massachusetts. This was the tree he's measuring at the time was known as the largest or the tallest eastern white pine in New York. It's called the Jake Swamp tree in Mohawk State Forest. And then this is me standing next to a former national champion sugar maple in Mohawk as well. And again, I think like this just happened this summer, August 13th, this article. This was the Warren Kinney White Oak in New Jersey. And I think this is like a good example of why I'm doing what I'm doing, documenting these trees before something like this happens. You know, this is a most likely 250, maybe older white oak tree. And at the time I measured it, it had the largest circumference of any white oak in the Northeast. And now it's, you know, now it's probably going to be in a fast decline with that huge wound open up on it. This last winter, I was super lucky to be able to partner up with Patagonia to spend about 10 days traversing the Sierra Nevadas and the White Mountains, documenting some of the oldest and largest trees in the Sierras during historic snowfalls, which for the purpose of the article, it was really important for us to only use human transportation getting up these mountains because we were able to see trees, you know, most likely how they lived for the last, you know, 1,500 to 2,000 years before a paved road was able to get people up there. So we were doing, you know, 20-mile hikes in 4-foot deep snow with either, you know, split board skis going up the mountain or with snowshoes. And on that trip, I was able to get the cover of a Patagonia journal with the shot of an ancient bristlecone. This is in the White Mountains. And while I was photographing this tree, we had hiked up to the top of this ridge in the White Mountains and set up camp. So we knew that we were going to camp there so I could wake up at sunrise. And it was probably one of the hardest hikes I think I've ever done. You know, again, 20 miles hiking up and just the coldest temperatures. And as soon as you're moving, your heart rate's going, so you're warm. But as soon as you stop, it's just like you have to get more and more down on or get in a sleeping bag. And my core temp went down so low. But luckily, I had friends that do this for a living, and they really get me some chicken broth and get me warmed up again. And woke up for sunrise and was able to get this shot before the snowstorm started back up. My friend Forrest hugging a big sugar pine. And kind of all this is leading to where I'm putting a lot of energy right now. So I'm working on our first book with a couple other collaborators, documenting the oldest and largest trees of New York State. And basically, the book's going to be broken down by chapters focused on the ecoregions of New York State. Um, and placing all these trees or forests within each ecoregion. For some of the trees that are probably going to be in it is this one, which is the oldest documented white pine in New York State, which I believe is around 450 or 470 years old, which was discovered by a team in the Nelson Swamp. This is on the left. This is the largest white oak. This is in Peekskill, New York, and it has about a 24-foot circumference. And then there's the current state champion white ash, which is in out in, trying to remember the area, but out near Letchworth State Park. But it's in decline from EAB because I don't think it's getting treatments. Some Dutchess County trees. This is the largest cucumber magnolia tree, which is on a private estate. This is a few of the largest. So the tree on your right is actually the largest eastern white pine by wood volume in the world. This was a discovery made by my partner on the book, Eric Danielson, about a year and a half ago. This is up near Old Forge in the Adirondacks. It's in an area of old growth that was basically missed by a storm that wiped out a lot of the bigger trees, I think back in like the 30s or 40s. If anybody else knows that, correct me. This is one of the largest black walnuts on your left. This is up in Oneida County. And then you also have the former, which was one of the largest black walnuts. This was at Bailey Arboretum on Long Island, but it since has been cut down because I believe that the inside was rotten and they were afraid that it was going to fall into the road and hit somebody. So again, going back to the importance of documenting these trees, tree on your left is the largest sassafras in New York State. This is in Orange County, New York. And then this is the largest eastern cottonwood, which also is the largest tree in New York State. I think it has if anybody's here that knows for sure, I can't remember, I believe it has like a 34-foot circumference, which is just crazy for any tree on the East Coast. This was a tree that I was able to discover this summer. This is now the largest bur oak in New York State, and it has a 25-foot circumference. This is in Dutchess County. Tree on your left is the largest known, and I feel like I should always say that because there's always room to find a bigger tree. So any of these trees that I'm saying that they're the largest is the largest known. So if anybody knows of any bigger ones, let us know. This is the largest American elm. This is up near Madrid, New York. So thanks for having me, guys.
Wow. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
That was such a fun journey. I love your origin story from skateboarding to ancient trees. That was really, really fun. So just so everyone knows, we'll be sending a follow-up email. They'll have a list of resources, links to the Gathering Growth website, and a recording of this webinar. And we'll also include a link to, there's a submission form on that website. So if you have a large tree that you would like Brian to come and check out for champion status or measurements, you can fill out that form and let them know about that. So please keep adding your questions into the Q&A. Before we launch into that, though, I just want to invite you to our next webinar. That's going to be on Wednesday, February 5th. And our speaker will be Charlie Canham, who's a forest ecologist emeritus from the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies, which is just down the road from us here in Millbrook. And Charlie's going to be talking about an ecological history of Hudson Valley forests. And we hope that we will see you there. So with that, let's get into these questions. The first one is very technical. Can large trees eat themselves? In other words, can they metabolize their heartwood?
I'm not sure. I also just want to put it out there that I'm like not a biologist or ecologist. I'm a photographer that's very passionate about big trees. So a lot of maybe technical questions like that, but I don't believe so, but maybe they can.
I don't know. That's actually something that Charlie Canham might know. So if you want to tune in again next month and ask that question again, that is something that Charlie might actually know.
I feel I have a camaraderie with you on that, Brian, because I feel like working for a conservation organization, people think I know everything about nature, but I'm not an ecologist.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Right, yeah, picking up knowledge as we go along, but
Yeah.
big time different background.
Yeah.
I could look at those pictures all day, my friend. That was really amazing. But this next question has to do with some technological type stuff and photography, so perhaps you'll have a understanding of it. How does photogrammetry and LiDAR technology play into recording trees and forests for ongoing assessments for health or decline to man-made causes and or environmental causes? Do you use any photogrammetry or LiDAR data in any of your to assess sites?
I don't personally ever run LiDAR, but my partner on the book and longtime friend Eric Danielson, he runs LiDAR, which is how he's made a lot of the big discoveries of the tallest trees in New York State. Instead of going out there throwing a clinometer at everything you see, it's way easier and you can, it's way more efficient. So that's how he was able to find a lot of these really tall pines that were record-breaking tall trees in New York State, including the one that's, 176, maybe taller now, white pine up near Lake George. But great question. I mean, I would love to, get into LiDAR more, or I just think to do documentation to see long-term changes in a forest to record its health, you would have to focus a lot of time to see that change. I think like at least 10 plus years of just documenting a single patch or an area of a forest.
Yeah, and I know
it seems like a really powerful combination of technology and just physical slogging yourself on out there and measuring it.
There are people that are doing it. I know that out west, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. My wife told me about it, but they've gone in and they've done LiDAR modeling of whole like redwood forests, and like it's incredibly detailed. So I mean that type of modeling would be incredible, especially to do in the eastern forests. Maybe there are people doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be very exciting to learn more about. So I'm very glad someone has asked this next question. I was wondering this too. Are the tree bases now being protected by exclusion fencing or some other method to prevent further soil compaction?
Some trees definitely get that attention. For example, I was just up in Clinton, New York at Hamilton College, where the state champion Norway spruce is, and there is a fence that goes around it, and the fence is like 30 feet from the tree, so nobody's going to get close to it. But you can go around the tree, or you go around the fence. But even that the national champion ponderosa pine has a fence around it as well. I think it's important. I think the best thing is to just not turn it into a tourist destination. I think that's why a lot of big tree hunters are really secretive about not giving up locations of these trees. It's why out in the redwoods, the Grove of Titans, which was one of the largest groves of single stem coast redwoods. I think now if you get caught there, well, now they put in a boardwalk because everybody was just trespassing and you were getting crazy soil compaction and the whole area around all those trees, which was super lush, like, 5 foot tall ferns, sword ferns, I believe, just like all gone, just from like everybody trampling around those redwoods for so long. So I don't know. It's like a not great thing to see a boardwalk or a fence around a tree, but sometimes it's important for the longevity of it, I guess.
Yeah, I was out in Montana where I saw the world's oldest larch tree, Gus. And there was a Boy Scout troop that would, after, like great amount of snow there, so there wasn't a lot of worry about compacting the soil. But when the snow had cleared, the Boy Scout troop would go and put planking around the trees, so
Yeah.
a boardwalk around the trees so that people could
Yeah.
monitor it.
I mean, I think it's smart. It just sucks because like that one that I showed out in Washington, the spruce, it's like one of these things where I don't know, maybe it's too late,
Yeah.
but who knows?
Right. Yeah. It's always an issue, right? The next question is kind of more policy and governmental based, but do you know of any efforts pushed by New York State right now to preserve existing forests and restore forests lost to development and other causes? Like, are you involved in any restoration processes or efforts or familiar with them?
I am not, but Anthony, you're saying that there are efforts right now being pushed by the governor?
Yeah, I think he's saying that there's isn't she proposing the planting of millions of trees in the next 10 years? And I mean, we have the state DEC working on a great deal of efforts, and we have the you know, carbon sequestration by 2035 projects going on. It's maybe I read his question as if you're know anything about any projects
I mean, the only thing I
or
was aware of
working.
is what the Biden administration was pushing for, which was for the protection of it. But I wasn't aware of anything that was happening on the state level. But if there is, that's great. Yeah.
And now we have a couple of questions that I'll kind of roll together. Some concerns about kind of the process of finding the champion trees. So the questions are about is there a fear of having the locations published because of potential vandalism or other harmful actions? And kind of a follow-up question, which is a property owner who has one of these trees on their land, are they given any support to help keep the trees alive and healthy? Especially since a lot of them seem to be in stressful conditions that are near roads or buildings and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, I usually don't like to put out locations, more so just so people don't trespass if it is on private property. I think if it's in a public park or if it's in a national park and it's publicly accessible, then you can't really stop somebody from going there. But if it's on private property, I usually like for the book or whenever I post anything on Instagram or online, I always just leave it as the county. And if somebody finds it, then they're they're out there looking for them. I mean, that's what I do. A lot of the trees that I go photograph, it's detective work and finding stuff all day. And a lot of times I find big trees via Google Earth. Uh, just look at on satellite view when the leaves are off and you can see big canopies or thick branches of trees. And then I go and look at them, but I always seek permission. So I would say, you know, if you see a big tree, just knock on somebody's door first. More times than none, they'll let you go look at it.
Hopefully, if people are seeking out you know, great amenities in our wilderness, they're also caring for them as well.
Yeah. I think there should, you know, I wish that that was maybe something in school, like more education on that, just like being respectful in nature. It's also a thing if there's a big tree on somebody's property and it's in poor health, then it's up to them what they want to do with it too. Can't ever like stop somebody from cutting down a tree if it's on their property.
Um, the next question I kind of view as I don't know, kind of tongue in cheek maybe, but like someone said, where's the documentary available? And I don't believe you have a documentary, but I kind of read this question as you should have a documentary. Because as
Oh,
I heard your story and watched you flip through the photographs of your first and second car and your trip out west, it felt very documentarian. So any thoughts on any filmography?
anybody out there wants to do something? I mean, yeah, it'd be fun. Uh, I've done a couple of little short films for brands or stuff like that just to highlight it. Uh, but yeah, I mean, that'd be fun. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I would want to do is just like get people excited about big trees the same way that I got just from like going to these places and showing them to people.
And did you mention there was a short film made about one of the big tree hunters out west? That might be
Yeah,
what they're
yeah,
thinking.
my friends and I we had made a film back in 2020 about Carl Casey, the big tree hunter. And if you go to gatheringgrowth.org, there's a whole section that has a couple of the videos so you can watch them there if you
Oh,
want.
okay. So that'll be on
Yeah.
the website.
Yep.
All right. And it's just so everybody remembers that website will be in the follow-up email. We'll send a link to you. So you'll be able to look that up. Now, here's another person who can't get enough of this asking, would you ever have another branch of the Gathering Growth Foundation working out of another state?
I have definitely thought about that. I mean, I think when I first started the project, I definitely was like, of course, just thinking of champion trees in the US and wanting to focus on that. But now since having my first kid, wanting to be closer to home. And so that's why I've chosen to do our first book on New York State. That said, I think from like a foundational aspect, if Gathering Growth Foundation was to become like a national organization, I would love to be able to open it up and have like an Ohio branch, a New England branch, a Florida branch, and just having it be something where the archivists that would be working under it. I mean, again, I don't get paid. This is all, I just do this because I love to do it. So it would have to be something like that, or it would have to be something where a brand or individuals or institutions funded the project in order to bring people on. Because to do it at the level that I'm doing it, just to give you an example, it's like I did the math a little while ago. It's almost $180 to $250 per image when it comes down to it because of all the gas, the travel, food, the cost of film, processing, developing, scanning, the time I'm putting into all that. It's it's a lot. So, but yes, to answer the question, I would love, I mean, that's like a goal of mine with Gathering Growth Foundation is to get it to a level where maybe somebody would be generous enough to support us as like a national foundation.
It'd be really cool if
Because that's also why I don't know if anybody saw, but on the cover of that book I posted for New York State, it says volume one. The goal is for volume two to be Pennsylvania, volume three to be maybe Connecticut or maybe New England, and have it be a volume series that ideally I get to do for the rest of my life.
regional books catch on, my friend, like a
Hey, man.
roadside geology and weird US that started in New Jersey and all those types of things.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be really cool. We'll keep our eyes out. The next question is kind of more large scale, but how big, do you know how big the biggest banyan tree is and where it is?
I
And
am not. I believe our banyan trees, are they native to Hawaii or is it more south? I'm not actually sure about banyan trees. I've been focused on the Northeast too long.
yeah, it looks like they're kind of more around the closest ones are in the American South, and it looks like in Mexico.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really familiar with what might be in the US. I feel like if anything, it's in Florida, like South Florida, maybe like around Miami or in that zone.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Sounds like a good reason for another trip.
exactly. Yeah. Florida volume like 8.
Yeah.
Now we have a couple questions about how you measure trees. I know you had talked a little bit about the point system that you're using. So one question is, do you always determine the size based on wood volume? Another one is just asking, how do you know how old the trees are?
So unless you core a tree or you know that it was like through archiving or documentation, you know that it was planted in a very specific time. Like, a lot of times with these big estates where you can find some of the biggest trees, you kind of could use that as a guide where like, say you have this giant white oak at Vanderbilt Estate, you're like, okay, well, when was Vanderbilt built? And you can kind of go from that, as long as it was maybe a tree that didn't get harvested. Um, but I would guess that just from determining how old a tree is the only sure answer is to ever core it though. And then to determine the size, I hardly ever do wood volume. I don't do wood volume modeling. So I kind of stick to the point system. And for anybody out there that's interested, the point system is determined by the circumference at 4.5 feet off the ground. So you do that in inches. Say you had a 200-inch circumference, you get 200 points, and then you do your height in feet. So if you had a 100-foot tree, you get 100 points, and then you do this average crown spread. So, the example might be north to south, east to west if it's longest branches. And then you divide that by 2, that's your average crown spread, and you divide that number by 4, and that's how many points you get. So you add all that up and you compare it with all the other trees in the state, and that's how you determine what are the biggest ones by the point system.
Oh, there's always a metric, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we have a statement that a question someone is letting you know if you know of the Y oak, the
Yeah.
white oak in Maryland, it has fallen down.
Yeah. I don't know how long ago it fell. I think it was, 10 plus or more years ago now. But I believe the white oak was the largest white oak in America. Um, but yeah, I never got to see that. That was before my time.
Hopefully someone took some good pictures of it.
There's definitely some good archival images of that tree. Same as the Salem oak in New Jersey and stuff like that.
And the next question is just someone commenting that your photos are wonderful and just wondering if you had an interest in trees before you started this project and probably before you hit California, or was that your first interest in big trees? Did you have interest in trees in general?
I think I think California and the Pacific Northwest was definitely like the driving force. Um, but I mean, I grew up, with my dad taking me camping all the time, going up to the Adirondacks as a kid, camping. And so I think whether I knew it or not, it was something that was like already in there. But then when you spend 10 plus years in New York City, it gets beat down a little bit. And so then eventually going out to California, I think it just like brought something out, and then reading certain books and just getting inspired that way, as well as, I mean, I don't know. To me, it's like the first time you stand next to a tree that's 20 plus feet in circumference. It's pretty moving, especially if you also like, yeah, go out to the redwoods or that 60-foot circumference Western red cedar, stuff like that. It's just kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that produces genuine awe in
Yeah.
almost every person who
Yeah.
sees them, no matter what their background or what their level of affection is for trees on a
Yeah.
daily basis. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also just like, you know, one of the cool things about trying to get people excited about these big trees or showing them that these trees are actually all around you. You know, in New York City, if you grew up there, then your baseline of how you understand trees might just be street trees. And so you might
Mm.
not think that trees get to be that big, but you can go out to Queens, you can go out to Staten Island, and the largest tulip tree in New York State's in Staten Island. It's got almost a 26-foot circumference. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially in the Northeast, the land use history here has involved so much deforestation. We're not used to having trees that big around us. So when you do find one, it's really special and
For
pretty
sure.
awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
Now, here's another question about giving you another reason to take another trip if you didn't already have enough reasons. Asking, do you have any photographs of the longleaf pine, which I know is more of a southern species?
Yeah, I do not. I don't
Better
have.
take a trip.
Yeah, I know. I look at my map all the time of all the trees I want to go photograph, and it's like when I first started this project, I had a number, and it was 795 trees. That's how at the time I started, that's how many national champions there were all over the country. And now it's like when I look at my map, I'm like, there's just thousands of trees, and I don't think I'll ever get to all of them, but at least I know I have stuff to do for the rest of my life, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, no, never get bored with that number.
Wow.
Someone is asking how they can get involved in the Catskills Park area, and that might be a broader question of if someone were wanting to get in, I'm not sure how this individual wants to get involved, if they mean photographing or helping identify or something like that. But if someone did want to get involved in the project,
Yeah.
could they and how?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, we always take submissions. I am always up in the Catskills, and you know, uh, so if anybody ever wants to go on hikes to go see big trees, I'm always down as long as it's a trip to where somebody's down to go bushwhacking for hours and hours up and down mountains, then yeah. They can, if anybody's actually interested, I was telling Julie the best way is just to either email me, which my email address will be in the follow-up email, or you can DM me on Instagram. So either or. And on Instagram, it's just Gathering Growth.
Cool. Thank you.
And next we have just a thank you for a wonderful presentation and how much they enjoyed your terrestrial journey. And a suggestion, as an arborist, you should try to get up in the canopies. That's another world that needs to be photographed.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I would love to take a class on, tree climbing and get all up in there because I think it's also unique perspective if you're in a forest or if you want to get like a higher perspective looking down into a tree. Yeah, that would be awesome. Keith,
And
hit
there
me
is a
up.
lot of great science going on looking at the ecology and the food webs of
Yeah.
canopies. And actually, there's a scientist who does some really great work. And we reached out to her about being a speaker in this webinar series. And she's really booked up with a world tour for the next year or so. But we're hoping to get her in a future series to talk about forest canopies.
Nice. Yeah.
It made me think there's a great book that I read to my kids called Luna and Me about the young woman in the 90s that climbed up a redwood
Yeah.
tree and lived in it
Oh,
for
yeah.
2 years. And she talks about the canopy and how that there's actually like some minor aquatic life in
Oh, yeah.
some
Tadpoles
larger.
and stuff up there. Blueberry, high bush blueberry, and just getting that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's there's more. Everyone's just giving you projects, Brian. I'm
Hey,
sorry.
yeah, no, take it.
So here's another project. Your pictures really capture the essence of each tree. Where can we view them? Will there be a book of Majestic Trees of America? I know you're working on the New York book, but do you ever plan on you
Yeah,
have
I
all the
mean, that
50
was
state books compiling them?
Yeah, I mean, that was the goal before. Like maybe that's something I would do going back to when I was just photographing champions. Because the champion stuff I was photographing was definitely national level. And like photographed like over 100 national champions. So maybe that becomes a book one day. Um, but I think at the moment, just focusing on state by state. Um, it's one of these things where I started big and then I went to New York. And the more I've dug into big trees or old forests or just trying to keep finding things, um, I don't know, it's like New York State. And then I could go the Adirondacks. And then the Adirondacks are really so big. So then you could go Ampersand Mountain. And then I could go to like the north side of Ampersand Mountain. And I could spend my entire life photographing that. And I just think like, so I'm just trying to give state by state attention at the moment. because that's already like the New York book we've been working on for just over 4 years. Um, I'm hoping another year of documentation, and then we'll be ready to, start getting it designed, sequenced, and then we're trying to find a publisher to help get it out there, as well as to try to find some funding to help publish it. So those are all things we still have to go through, but in the works.
Yeah, I think selecting the proper scale is a
Yeah,
really important part of every project.
for sure. Yeah.
So now we have a question, and I'm so glad somebody asked this. Do you know of any scientific or genetic studies that are looking to help plant future champions from current ones? So I think kind of suggesting that these champion trees might be genetically more robust, more resilient in some way.
Yeah, there's trying to remember the name of the book. I think it's like The Man Who Planted Trees. Uh
Mm.
there's a book, his name is David something, I believe. He's Wisconsin or Michigan, I think. But anyways, he started an organization called the Archangel Tree Project. And with the goal that that is the belief that these champion trees have some sort of genetic significance or strength. And so yeah, I think he's been doing it for 10 plus years, got crazy funding and started this massive, massive greenhouse project. And then they go through and work on national parks, work on state parks, and they go around with all these champion trees because their big one that they started with was with the redwoods. Um, and then they've gone past that. So yeah, Archangel Tree Project, I believe, is your ticket.
Cool. Hopefully we can put that in the resources that we send out. That
Yeah.
was a really, really interesting question. The next one comes in, have you documented any beech trees, hoping that you have as a result of the beech leaf disease?
Yeah. They're hard to come by, but there are a few forests in New York State that have pretty healthy American beech. I don't know if they're disease resistant or they just haven't gotten there yet, but there's some, 12-foot, 11-foot circumference American beech, which is pretty rare these days. Um, Mostly in the north or in like Onondaga and Oswego County, or out in western like Erie and Allegheny. That's where you're gonna see American beech right now. Anything else is like pretty small. And it's like, where it dies and then it just comes up again and you have whole forest floors that are just beech suckers. It's really annoying.
Yeah, well, it's been sad to see that happen
Yeah.
to our beech forests.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is a great question. What is your favorite champion that you've gotten to document? And also just a question about what is the largest circumference of a tree east of the Mississippi, if you know that off the top of your head.
Uh, I'm gonna go with it's either gonna be the cottonwood that's up in near Albany that's got like a
Wow.
34-foot circumference, or I mean, there's also like the live oaks down in Florida that are massive, as well as there's some bald cypress that are probably, with the huge swollen buttresses down south that are, I think, east of the Mississippi that probably have massive, massive buttresses. I don't know off the top of my head though. But up in the Northeast, definitely that Eastern cottonwood is the largest circumference, I believe. And that was
Okay.
recently remeasured by Fred Regalia up at Landis Arboretum. Um, and then from a favorite champion tree, uh, I
It's like
don't
trying to
know.
pick your favorite
I
kid,
know. Well,
right?
I'm trying to think of like a moment. I mean, I really, really loved photographing the Great Basin Bristol Cone, mostly just because I was with like two of my best friends on the mountain side of a mountain, and we waited all day thinking the light was going to change, but it was still like, a 12-mile hike off the mountain, and we were just like waiting, waiting, waiting until it was like our last chance before it was going to start to get dark. And it was just horrible light all day, but it was still fun just to be up on the side of a mountain with your friends in an area that most likely like no one even knows exists.
Mhm.
So it's pretty cool. I feel like that's anytime I get to go to a tree where I feel like nobody's been for years and years and years, those are the best ones. There's just
So like it's some like
there's a really perfect silence that happens.
an innate thing in humans that like when you get to that quietest part where you don't know it's been in a long time, there's a comforting feeling with
Oh,
it.
I mean, I've had it where, oh, I remember now for the Western juniper. There was a Western juniper out in Christmas Valley, and it's within the Lost Forest Research unique area. I believe that's what it's called. And it's this ponderosa pine, Western juniper grove of trees that's surrounded by like 30 or 50 miles of sand desert on either side of it. And so then I don't think a lot of planes fly over. And so I remember driving out there and it was like the bumpiest like Bureau of Land Management roads I've ever been on. Thought my car was going to break down. I'm out there by myself. Finally get to an area where I'm just going to like camp for the night, wake up for sunrise to photograph the tree. And I turn my car off and I step out and it was like a vacuum, just like, and it was like eerie. It was like the weirdest feeling where there was just no sound. And because you're stepping on sand, it's like you can't even have a concept of space really. And all of a sudden you just start hearing this like doof, 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 and it was just the blood in my ears. And that was like the only sound I could hear. And it was the weirdest shit, but it was so cool.
That's so cool. Yeah, you're a very good storyteller, Brian. That harkens me back to a road and area I drove in Wyoming one time.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, I love it.
Yeah, that's very cool. Now we're gonna get after that, nice poetic moment. I can't help but ask this question. One of our favorite uh question askers of the series asked, "Do you dress up as Paul Bunyan on Halloween?
I do
If
not.
not, idea, more ideas.
No. I'm kind of always going for Chewbacca. I feel like he lives in the woods. I need him. I'm trying to channel that energy.
Mhm.
I love it.
I can't think of a better one.
Yeah.
No,
Do you know the age and size of the oldest tree in Dutchess County by any chance?
Uh, I don't know the oldest. Uh, I don't. Sorry, I know potentially some of the biggest, but I don't know.
Ooh, what are some of the biggest ones?
I think the biggest tree in Dutchess is the Pine Plains sycamore, which I'm sure if you live in Pine Plains or in the area, you just drive some of the back roads, you see it right out in front.
Yes, I wave at it every time I drive by. I say, hi, tree.
Yeah, it's a
It's
huge
amazing.
pine. Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
the largest American sycamore in New York State.
Is it really? I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean its circumference. I mean it's tall and the circumference is just massive. So
Huge. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Next time I will not just wave, I will get out and bow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's massive.
ask for its autograph.
Yeah.
Yeah, something about the sycamores in eastern New York, in the central Hudson Valley area, just wild,
Yeah.
absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Here's a cool question. What inspired you to name your organization Gathering Growth?
Uh I really like alliteration. Uh and so when trying to come up with a name for a company or an organization, my now wife, when we were just still dating in Brooklyn, we were at a bar trying to figure it out, and I think she said it. And because it you just we kept breaking down of like, what am I doing? I'm documenting trees. Well, I don't really want to have that in there. So what am I? I'm gathering this information, and what am I gathering? Trees, but like I don't want to have it be so specific. I want to have it be more obscure, and so we're documenting the growth of these trees or like the girth of these trees. So we landed on growth. So it was gathering growth.
It's a good name.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's a really good name. And the last question we have is asking, do you have any thoughts on light and sound pollution with regards to the longevity of trees?
I don't know. I mean, I don't like it, but I mean, I'm sure I mean, that was like one of the interesting things again, going back to that tree that I photographed, the Sitka spruce. that's a tourist destination in Washington. I went at peak snap your photo Instagram time, and so I recorded the sound then, and it was just, you know, screaming, kids yelling, people just being like, go climb up on it, take a photo, like almost like, you know, as if this thing is just like there for us to like jump all over and get your Instagram fix. um and then I went back at 5 a.m. and I recorded sound then. And so I have it on the website where you can listen to both, because the one that is no sound is probably what that tree had for almost 800 years. And I think that's like a cool comparison, is like, this is how most of these trees lived, like just silence for a millennia. And then all of a sudden now there's like roads that go through there and shit. It's crazy.
That is such a
But
cool,
I don't know if any of them have, I don't know if sound pollution or light pollution have any effects. Maybe, but
on
I'm
a,
sure there's some studies.
yeah. Part of someone else's question is where can folks hear this audio on your website?
yeah. Yeah. So again, on Gathering Growth, I'll be honest, I haven't been doing the audio recordings in the last few years with a lot of the New York stuff. It was mostly a lot of the work I was doing back when I was just photographing champion trees. So if you go to the champion tree section specifically is where you're going to hear a lot of the audio. But yeah.
Well, Brian, you have answered questions for about 32 minutes, so I applaud your tenacity and ambition, and sincerely want to thank you tonight for
Yeah.
the fantastic story that you've told us. I know that I might stop and snap some photos and DM them to you. They probably
Please.
won't be record breakers, but I'll be like, you know what? Really want
Hey,
to share this tree with Brian. I'm sure you get a lot of that, but I might become one of those people.
well, also, I just want to lastly add, is like, I'm trying to do it at a really high photographic level, but it's the cool thing about photography is even if you just take a photo of a tree that's on a sidewalk, that tree is going to add to an archive that maybe in 50 years, somebody's going to be able to have that before and after to show the growth of that tree. And so, you know, I think everybody with a cell phone has the hidden obligation to be an archivist.
I
I
think
love it.
we'll accept that mission.
Yeah, I don't know, it's cool.
Go forth, everyone, and
Yeah.
become archivists.
Yeah.
Cool, Brian. Well,
Yeah.
honestly, thank you so much. I hope our paths cross on some tree adventure someday.
Yeah, please.
And we'll reach out. And thank you so much for your time tonight. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Y'all hung on through a lot. A lot of you hung on through a lot of questions, and we appreciate you. And we'll see you next month for Charlie Canham. And thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
very much. Have a great night.
Bye.